And I believe we are live streaming.
Oh, quick. Love it. Hi, guys. I am Victoria L. And we have a special guest. Oh, wait, next to me, I'm so sorry. Next to me is my sister, Maggie, the A1 since day one, 5 years old. Oh, Lord, she getting ready to turn 37. So we'll talk about that later. Yes. So thank you so much for watching The Waiting Game, Chapter 35. Maggie, please say hello to the people.
Hi, everyone.
And please introduce this lovely couple.
Yes, we have Mr. Larry and Mrs. Aaliyah Riley on with us today. They are an awesome couple. When I tell you their presence, both of them individually, but then as a couple, as a united front, they are amazing. I think they will have a great story to tell from their kids, from working together, from businesses, from ventures, just everything. I think they will bring a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. And in sharing their story and experience, you always know we learn something new from every couple we bring on. So welcome to Larry and Aaliyah.
It's wonderful to be here, everyone. Thank you for the intro.
Of course. Now, let me make sure I can see y'all on Facebook before we get started. I want to make sure, Victoria, I'm looking at your page.
Well, on the stream, it says I'm live, but
okay.
Yeah. But you never know. I don't know what Facebook does. So
that's why I just want to make sure. My Facebook is slow, but let's go.
Let's make sure that Zoom says it's live on Facebook. So we're
there. Okay, we are definitely live. So yes. I'm going to pass it over to Larry and Aaliyah to tell us a little bit about yourselves, your love story, how you met, and then we'll ask some questions along the way.
And this is where it's great to be chivalrous and say, ladies first.
Always.
Oh, I knew that was coming. So good evening, everyone. I'm Aaliyah Riley, Aaliyah Brumell Riley. Let's see, I currently work in telecommunications, and I also have a business that I have been so excited to begin, I guess, a couple of years ago in fashion and retail, doing what I love. I have been married to this wonderful young man, we'll say, now for 15 years. So ooh. I guess I kind of like him.
Right.
No, in all honesty, absolutely love him. Really excited to spend life in my days with him. And we've got two wonderful children. My daughter is our oldest, and she is 9. Her name is Bryn. And my son is Lawrence, not the third, but Lawrence, or Trey, as we like to call him, who is 5. So does that kind of get us started? And do you want to go into how we met, Larry?
That does get us started. And okay. Larry wants to give us background, or you can jump right in onto how you guys met.
I'll give a quick background. Greetings, everyone. This will be when I talk about myself just a bit. Most of this is going to be bragging about my wife. I can tell you up front that, guys, that's how I stay together. The end. Larry Riley grew up in DC. I know we'll tell the story of how we met. Been in Atlanta about 30 something years now. It's been a long time. Aaliyah gave our story. We've been looking very, very forward to sharing. We love to share our story. We think we have a great story to share, but we also know there's a lot of great stories out there. We're probably just going to speak to the testimony that everyone has inside. So I say we jump on in and just kind of get started with whatever you want us to do next, Maggie. We'll take the floor. So what do you think?
Let Aaliyah lead. And how did you guys meet? You said you've been married 15 years, but how long were you dating and how did that start off?
So we met at a business meeting. It was kind of interesting. Totally, I was certainly not looking for love. I was looking for a business opportunity.
Right.
I'm an enterprising woman and always have been. And so walked into this business meeting, met this gentleman, but had no intentions of, going certainly beyond that because I was there for business, how we get when we're focused. But, I guess he'll probably give his version, which is different.
Very, very different. And I can honestly say it was love at first sight. Aaliyah walked in the room. I remember the sky blue top with the black, I remember the whole thing. She
Oh my
walked in the
gosh.
room, and I knew it happens. It's possible, because that's my first statement, is that I literally said to myself, I'm marrying her. And then but I was like, but this is a business meeting, so I got to play it cool. And so, but of course, being a business meeting, what are you allowed to do without any worries? Ask for a business card with a number on it, right? Then you just got to figure out how to see what might be out there. So of course, I happened to lose the card like 3 or 4 times. And
It wasn't that many. Wait a minute.
It was, no, you just don't remember. It was actually a lot. So it was actually like, it was a bunch, but just started the conversation, and just I was ready up front, right? I would, like I said, love at first sight, but I also knew that patience is a virtue. And it was obviously very clear from the first couple of conversations, like she just said, she was not looking for that. So it just, took time. And funny, we talk about this, babe. It's like, we don't remember exactly how long we dated. Exactly we met. It was about 2 years, right? I think we met in 2004, because I think I just got my braces. That's the only thing I remember. So it was like in 2004, got married in 2006. So it was actually, these days now, that's actually pretty fast.
You had your red car, because when I met you, you still had the red car, the Grand Prix.
That's right, the red Grand Prix. That's right.
So we know, Larry, you were ready to get married, but Aaliyah, were you single when you were walking into this meeting?
I was single when I was walking into this meeting, and my intent was, we'll see what happens, but that was not in my intent for it to be a love connection. So
how old were y'all?
Oh gosh, let me see. I think I certainly must have been in my 20s. Now it feels like long time ago.
And I was actually, this is the one detail we laugh about, at 8. So Aaliyah either likes them old or I like them young. Take your pick. But I've got it by 8 years. So, yeah. So I was actually got married at 36 or 34.
Okay.
35.
30.
I didn't realize there was an 8-year age difference. Okay.
Actually, he made the cutoff.
I made the cutoff by like 3 days, because 8 years was her max.
What's the cutoff, Aaliyah?
Okay.
The cutoff is 10 years, and that's probably a different episode.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Once you start,
there's no cutoff anymore, but it was.
I'm just saying, truly.
I had to learn that my cutoff was like, I didn't really have one, and I used to date older. And recently, in the past like 3-4 years, I was like, 10 years is that.
10 years.
10 years is the cutoff.
That's my cutoff too. And the reason that I say that is because as you span decades, there's a lot that gets lost in translation. They can't explain. And so I, just based on past experience, what I had learned from others and gathering, I said, 10 years is probably a good cutoff. So he made that.
So he approached you, right? So when he approached you, was you just like, okay, are you talking about business? I mean, what's going on? Like, did you?
That was really how it was, because like I said, how we are as women, when we're focused, we're focused.
Right.
So
right.
If that's not a part of the plan, that's not a part of the plan at that point in time, I'll say. Right. But yeah, he walked up to me, he asked for my number, and I said, oh, okay, but definitely made known that I was there for business. And so, we, so I gave him my number and ran into him again at this, at the business meeting. And
I'll just jump in, babe. It's a weekly meeting. That's key. Right. So that's why I knew, I was like, there isn't so much riding on each interaction. I knew like,
right.
Should be there next week.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So you clearly, when you said this is your wife, you clearly was single, right? Okay. Because I'm just saying, because now it might be a little different with that. People, the guys, do you feel like when you got married, like, how do I say this? So you weren't looking for him, right? So since you weren't looking for him, when did you say, boom, this is it?
I was, it was interesting. I had actually come out of a bad relationship. It was very intense emotionally and otherwise. And so I was trying to take my time and be very intentional. So it was important to me to be friends with whomever I was going to entertain as being, a boyfriend, a husband, what have you. So I felt like that needed to be kind of the basis. And so, through it all, so we were seeing each other every, week or so. Certainly he had work stuff that would come up and he would hit the road. Maybe I would, so we wouldn't, it wasn't like we saw each other for 2 years, like, no, but it was like, life happens. Things happen just over time. But what I found was over that period, we just grew this really good friendship. And, we had a genuine connection. I felt like he was genuinely a supportive, nurturing person. And it was like, well, so then as you start kind of thinking like, oh, I wonder if and so as soon as you allow yourself to kind of go in that direction, it's really interesting what starts to happen.
So what started to happen?
Well, then I began to actually entertain him as more than a friend in my head, because it was like, okay, so wait a minute, but then, our friendship though was certainly continuing to blossom. And then I think at one point, I'm thinking this probably in the end of that 2-year span, we ended up going on a trip together. And so I think at this point we had decided that we were kind of, exclusively, really dating and, seeing one another. And it was funny because we were in the car headed to Florida to meet, I guess, another business partner for, and to actually meet at the time my in-laws, but we were all going to be together. And so as we're meeting him and talking with him, he asks us, so when are you going to get married? And so it was like, whoa, wait a minute. So but it wasn't a scary thought to either of us, which I think was definitely very telling. We were seemingly, it was like, oh yeah, so when are we going to get married? So it wasn't like, oh well, we need to think about this. It was kind of like, oh okay, well when are we going to do this?
Now I have to jump in here. We actually were driving back from that day in Jacksonville, and we just literally like somewhere outside of about an hour, and we just started talking about what the wedding would look like. We just found ourselves in a conversation. There really wasn't a huge moment where it was like a ultimatum dropped or anything. It was just, okay, we're getting married. It just flowed. And it wasn't like we're resigned to it. It was just, okay, it was awesome, right? I do remember this though. We that was on like a Sunday. We were driving back, right?
Oh, wow.
And then based on our schedules, we didn't get together until like a week later. And we had said, okay, well, we're both planners. We both like to plan and have things in order. So if we're going to start planning a wedding, we decided up front, and maybe this is something for folks we weren't going to draw this thing out. If we're going to get married, we're going to get married in a few months. We're not going to do the 5-year courtship thing or whatever. Right.
So we had already been dating.
We'd already been dating for a couple years, but once you decide you're going to get married, waiting after that for a long, right. So we decided we're going to come over to my house and have our first actual planning conversation. Right now, I had I learned a long time ago. My dad taught me a lot of cool things, and basically, a wedding is all about the bride, right? The groom gets a couple of requests, but it's our wedding, but it's her day. That's kind of the mantra, right? So I know I had a few things. I wanted normal looking tuxedos. I wanted normal music, right? I wanted normal food, right? And so I had some basic. I had like 5 things that were like, these are my things I want. So I was like, so we were sitting down talking. I'm gonna tell on her here. So I said, Aaliyah, what do you want? Girlfriend pulls up her laptop, right, with the multi-tab spreadsheet of her vision of the wedding that she had been kind of starting to plan in her head for a while, right? Okay. And so, but I loved it because I was like, okay, you're sandbagging a little bit for a while, because this was like a detailed like
Well,
event.
we generally have an idea in our head of what we would want to do when we get married. The person that we marry is usually the detail,
Correct.
I was in cell C5.
We don't know.
Insert name here.
Right. So she wrote the vision. So she made it plain. That's what she did. Okay. Well, did you both, either one of you guys, did you ever consider marrying someone else before you met?
Before the two of us met one another? I think the relationship that I was in, it was heading in that direction.
Okay.
What we came to realize was that we were not the right people to get married together. We were not right for each other. So I think that was key. And when Larry and I met, everything just started piecing together well. And you didn't have to force it. It just kind of worked itself out. I remember when we were going through counseling, marriage counseling, and the pastor that we were working with at the time, he said, you all have talked about and thought through a lot of these things already. You seem to be, kind of on the same page. And I guess we were like, oh, okay.
I always feel a little weird saying this, but it is what it is. You're looking at my first girlfriend. Right. And so I like to say that, I grew up in a wonderful household with a wonderful example of parents, right, who are still married today, 50, almost 52 years now. And so I know this sounds a little Oedipus Rex or whatever, but my mom was just a great example. And the way my dad treated my mom was a great example. So whenever I would go on a date or two with somebody, it was very clear. It was like, does this person measure up to the image of what I know, what I'm looking for or not? And if it was not, it's like, I'm not going to get all excited and go down a long road. And so that's how I ended up being 34, 35 years old, never having seriously dated somebody. Right. And I'll let you know I wonder what I was dealing with as a 34-year-old single man, never dating anybody in Atlanta, African-American, I just had to say, you know what, this is my business. I'll get married when I'm married. So, so when Aaliyah came along, I think that's why my spirit just clicked. It was like my antenna was tuned in. It was like, that's her. And then when I realized that, yes, it wasn't just a crazy feeling that she was the one, it was just very easy to roll into a partnership.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, y'all are tough because not to say that, we've had some amazing couples on the show, amazing stories, but y'all are just like, okay, we just took this piece and went boom. Like, what? Okay. And, it's very like, we already know that it is what it is. She wasn't studying it. Then he said, yes, you're it. And then boom. And he wouldn't date nobody because he was intentional about dating based off of, you made a great point that, because Maggie and I talk about this all the time, our parents, okay? Our parents are the example of what we want in our relationships. But as you know, because y'all been in 15 years, the society has changed a little bit. It's we try to let our parents know it's not really, my parents been married almost 40 years. It's not to say that it's not the same, but it's just a lot different. I think it's, especially in Atlanta, it's just a little different. And I think that it's not that we gave up hope. Now we still have hope, but we already know what God has set before us. It's happening. But it's just not happening clearly on our time. Because we would have got married 10 years ago. I hear you. And Magdalene, you've heard this, and whoever's in the audience, we can't see anybody, you may have heard this so many times. At some point, financial reality does come into play about why things change, right? And my dad and I talk about this all the time. When he and my mom got married, they were keeping 85 cents of every dollar after taxes, right? And so it's very easy, relatively, to
raise children and go on a few trips. And if you have stable income and stuff like that,
Right.
And a 40-hour week, well, we laugh at that idea this year, but I grew up, no, my parents, they worked 40 hours. My dad walked out of that house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he was walking back in the door at 5:30 or 6 every day. And so there are certain realities that say, the financial reality and the demands on time and everything, it is harder to form that union, right? And find someone that meets the standard, and you can do it because at some point marriage is a business, it's a partnership.
Yes.
And that's a whole, we may in the next 30 whatever minutes have to get into that side of things too. But that's a big piece of what it takes to be successful, for sure.
Well, and to that end, I think it's for me at least, the friendship component was important because of all of those things. Because in my head, while yes, I need to absolutely find you attractive and all of those things, but if we're not friends, then there are going to be times where I'm just going to be frustrated, where we're going to not be on the same page. And so if there isn't something that kind of connects us beyond the actual connection, it does make it really difficult to be able to go from there.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, Magdalene.
No, well, I was going to ask a question because y'all talked about friends, and I wanted to say, I think I know the answer. However, I'm still going to ask, would you say you need to be friends before you date? Or what would the advice and guidance be if somebody met potentially a month ago or 6 weeks in and started dating and potentially haven't built that solid friend foundation? Like, give or take, is there one way better than the other, or it's just different paths?
I think it's different paths, but I do think that you still need to have a friendship at the core. So that you need to figure out what happens after I feel like, oh my God, you're just so fine. Because there are times where that's not going to be enough, and it's enough for a time. But if your belief is that marriage is a commitment forever, or truly until death, then you do need to have something to build on. And I think it's also important to make sure that you're moving in the general same direction.
Right.
And so, again, if you've got the, rose-colored glasses on, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, we don't want the same things. That's going to be a problem.
We call it living in la la land.
Yeah,
we don't
all day.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to be headed.
It's when I tell you the story about how I love at first sight, technically speaking, I was in love before I liked Aaliyah, right? Oh. And so the idea of, do you have to be friends first? No, you don't, by definition, right? It can happen. However, as frustrating as it was for the first couple of years, I'm looking back very glad that Aaliyah wasn't also head over heels, because that meant, all I could do was be practical and intentional and establish a relationship, right? And probably slow my roll and, do what I was supposed to do anyway, which is think and form the connection, I'd like to think it would have turned out great if Aaliyah had also felt the same way in the same moment, but you never know. Would we have rushed? Would we have, looked past some things and not dealt with some things ahead of time and be on a different path because we went too fast, because there was no, like you said, Magdalene, friendship there. So I would just say, however you start, whether you're smitten, whether you taking your time and not looking, just kind of thinking, maybe, you got to be intentional and take your time to get to know versus be friends. I think the friends thing is almost like you should be hanging out buddy.
Right.
It's kind of not necessarily compatible with being a couple, but you should get to know and I love what Leah said, be on the same page.
Right. See, I'm glad you said that, because in our past shows, and one of our sisters is not on the show today, but she used to always be like this: I'm not looking for no friend. She says that all the time. And I understand that to a degree. I'm like, look, I got a billion guy friend. I'm looking for somebody who's intentionally trying to find a wife, you know what I mean? Or be a husband. But see, now you made it more clear when you said, okay, because you weren't thinking about no friends when you saw her, but you had to be, because she brought you back down the size. It said, hey, chill out a little bit. Then it became friends. You actually liked each other. So you didn't just love each other, you liked each other. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. It's good.
I think one thing I'll throw in here, Leah talked about being on the same page. I think that's one important aspect of a long-term relationship, and that's we've been married 15 years. Aaliyah's parents, God rest his soul, till death did they part. And then my parents are still married. My grandparents 66 years. One thing that everybody had in common was that there was some sort of long-term vision, dream, goal, something driving or being a main facet of the relationship. And Aaliyah mentioned her business, her fashion line. I am not a fashion person. I'm not a creative person. But when I was visiting Aaliyah's house for the very first time in Jersey, I saw a drawing on a wall, and it was like a fashion drawing. I asked what that was, and she made a comment about, oh, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a fashion designer, da da da. And I was like, well, why didn't you? And really the answer, not to be blunt, was because life just kind of takes its course like it always does at that age. But she still had enough of a fire in there to still have a picture up on her wall. And and I was like, well, if you want to pursue something, babe, let's think about doing it. Right. And then that became, well, maybe we should start grad school. That became starting the fashion line. That became, and so it's just it's been this 10-year plus journey, right? That has been a common thread of, being part of a vision, right? I think that's the most important thing you can ever do in a relationship is identify. Everyone's got some sort of vision, either outward or deep down. They got the seed of something they would love to do if someone would support it. Find that and be that support. Like I said, I'm not the creative person. I don't know much about fashion. Aaliyah got me watching Project Runway. That was her big accomplishment, right? But I do like to execute. I'm an operations person. I'm a technical person. So I've kind of found my role of Aaliyah sets the vision, and then she says, this needs to look like this at this time, and I can make it happen, right? And so I've kind of found my niche within an area that otherwise I wouldn't be very comfortable in. But that'll probably be one of the most important things you can do is support a vision. And for those who have a vision, do not align with someone who is not in support of your vision. Just don't. Run away, because it will destroy you.
Well, and I think the important thing there was the models that we had for relationships that work were kind of clear depictions of that. So like certainly with Larry's parents, they were in business together. And, that became kind of the foundation or the connection that they were able to build upon, and uniquely in very different ways to make that work. So they were each kind of their own entity working together to really drive and power that. And so with my parents, my mother enjoyed singing. And so she had gotten to a point where she was singing with the New York Grand Opera and other things. And so my dad had his own business. And so he was able to be home with us more and make a lot of decisions, to help do things with my brother and I. But in supporting my mom and her, dream, that was one of the things that I saw. And so but I think at the same time, he was able to be an individual too, because I think it's important to support a dream that your partner has and that you both have some sort of a connection to, because that kind of encourages, fosters, and fuels. But at the same, but you can't fall into that becoming what you are if that's not who you are. That's really critical too, because then you'll wake up and be like, well, what the heck? I'm just following you all around the world, about me, so you have to make sure that you're still pouring into yourself and you're nourishing the things that you enjoy and the components of life that you appreciate.
So you both, well, I think Aaliyah mentioned it first, but being on the same page, and then Larry touched on it. When you talk about being on the same page, what are some of those things that you discussed, even when from the marriage counselor, the pastor that said, it seems like you guys are pretty much on the same page. What are those key 3 or 4 things that you truly aligned on and you would say, make sure these are some of the conversations you're having?
Go ahead, Larry.
Finances. Be open about it. Figure it out. And again, I assume, Magdalene, you talk about kind of, okay, we're at the long-term point.
We're talking about having a relationship, we could see it. What are those things you really need to have those difficult?
Right. I mean, if you're not somewhat aligned financially, either what you're going to be bringing to the table, both good and bad, right? And no bad financial surprises after the wedding day, right? That'll get you off on a bad foot. And we chuckle, but there's a lot of marriage counseling based on people finding out about debt or bankruptcies or liens after they've gotten married, and now it's joint credit, right? So it sounds very practical. It's because it is, right? Is that something to be very aligned with? It also can be kind of tough, right? Because you don't want to feel great about somebody and then not know all this and kind of wonder, right? But it's reality. So that's the one thing we talked about and aligned on in general about, what we're bringing to the table. And then one other thing, and I like to talk about like division of labor, right? We are equal partnership, 50-50, 100-100, whatever you want to say. But in the end, you bring different strengths and weaknesses to the relationship, and therefore to the operation of your business, of your marriage, of your relationship. I don't, this is going to sound very stereotypical, but I'm dangerous in the kitchen if I'm not cleaning it, right? Leah doesn't want me anywhere near a stove, right? But at the same time, I actually enjoy cleaning for some strange reason, right? Okay. And so you can kind of see a natural division of labor just running our house right there, right? And then Aaliyah's amazing. I'll get started, but when it comes like kind of being the main person that kind of sets the kids' agenda, right? And what's happening both short and long term. So having those divisions of labor and kind of knowing what they are and being comfortable in them is important to kind of know up front. What you don't want to do is have, you both like to do X and you both hate to do Y, right? And the joy you get out of liking to do the one thing is overshadowed by the fact that you hate to do the other thing, and that's always a source of conflict, right? So those are a couple of things that we kind of landed on pretty early. And I think, Pastor Dan, we had been talking about that kind of stuff even prior to starting marriage counseling. In fact, I really think we went into marriage counseling, babe, because we're kind of supposed to, right? Because we
didn't know what we really didn't know. But I think, the basis that we both had kind of because we were working on ourselves, right? So I had already read The Birth Order and all of these other books to try to better understand the role that I felt that I play in the world and where I thought I was going to be best served. And then when I got into the business, I began to really work on my leadership abilities. Well, those were things that Larry was already working on as well. And then I remembered separately, we read the 5 love languages, and then we read it together. And so there were a lot of ways that that uniquely we were working on ourselves. But then when we came together, we were able to identify a lot of those things in ways that we could better collaborate because we had already begun sort of that journey, if you will.
You could tell that you guys are business oriented. Like, you know what I mean? Like, creative, of course, because you have passion, but you can tell, like, even the way you talk with love, as you said, marriage is a business. It is. I mean, it just is. Of course, it's a loving business, but it's a business. So I think that even hearing you guys talk is very practical, because I know sometimes people paint marriage to be like, oh, I'm just so la la la. I mean, not to say that it can't be, but I'm just saying it to withstand this thing called marriage. You got to take those times to say, we got to come back down and say, hey, me and you, let's talk about where we are and get out the clouds. Like, even though, but that's because of society and TV. Like, it just really is. TV just makes it worse. But I really appreciate you guys being so practical. You guys have probably been one of the most practical couples that we've had. I promise you, you guys are like, no, we need to do this. Okay, we got to do this. Which is a great thing. So.
We are I laugh because we're probably the most practical out of many of our friends.
Y'all are practical, straight up.
But I think in a way, because I think there are other times as well that we're smitten with one another.
Sure.
And we appreciate the dynamics of that. But I think having it having both, worlds, so to speak, and knowing kind of when you're going to need to kind of pivot and say, okay, this is when we need to figure some stuff out. Yeah.
Right.
Especially once you start having children, because those jokers,
we only have 20 minutes, babe. Don't go there.
I mean,
those jokers. Woo.
So let's talk about that, since we're talking about the business side, and Larry said we'll get back to it. Let's get back to yes, we know love at first sight. Yes, we know Aaliyah brought you back down and said, really, what do we need to do? And then we got on the same page. So what else from a business perspective, business relationship, business or marriage as a business, what else do we need to know or our audience needs to hear?
I think the spiritual connection is also really important. Now, I'm not going to say that you both have to be completely aligned in every way spiritually, because that's probably not going to be fair. We're growing and changing and at different, stages. And so there are going to be areas where we align, and there are going to be areas where we just may not necessarily agree about a particular thing. And that's okay. But I think, we both have a similar understanding of who we feel God is, who God is to us, and how we want to drive our house. And I think that is also really key.
Yes.
Because I know, as you look at relationships, especially as you begin to get older and you're kind of a little more intentional in looking for a partner, there are going to be other things that, maybe if you had started when you were like 19 or 20, then it would be like 35.
Right.
Stuff like that. Then you start looking at other things like, well, maybe let's shift that. I think there are ways to make areas that don't completely align and match like perfect to make that work, as long as you're on the same page in other areas. And I think that's one of those keys.
I think when it comes to the business of running of a marriage, right? Think of any business you start up, whether it's a lemonade stand or a restaurant or whatever. You start small because you don't have much to start with, right? And then you don't get ahead of your skis in terms of what you spend or what you plan on, etc., because you know that if you do that too much, what's going to happen? You will close. And given how much you pour into a business, when it shuts down, you see people all the time, it breaks them. And it's sad, but it's almost like that's almost what's supposed to happen, because you're supposed to put your heart and soul into getting a business off the ground, right? Marriages, from a financial practical standpoint, the same way. You're starting at a certain point. That's why you got to be very open, just like with a business. If you go for a business loan, that banker is going to want all your business. They're going to want to know every dollar, where every dollar is going, how much you make, how much you keep, what your expenses are, how much debt you have, all that stuff. That's the kind of conversation, brass tacks, you have to have up front as a partnership to know where you're starting from, right? Because as time goes on, as inflation keeps going, as taxes take more of your income and all of these kind of things, and dollars go much less and good jobs are harder and harder to find, your ability to navigate with what you have and try to A, live, and B, plan for the future, it's a day-by-day march. It really is. Just like running a business is a day-by-day thing financially. And so you talk about practicality, Victoria, and it's very easy for me to be practical, if you can't tell, with this particular aspect of it, because I think it's so very important. But it's also very easy for me to, I'll brag on my wife. She took me to Hawaii for my 50th birthday a couple weeks ago. That's why we couldn't be on the call a few weeks ago, right? And that entire week was La La Land, I can promise you, right? So you got to be intentional, but you can make the balance. But in this thing, you got to be hyper practical. It can't just be we'll figure it out, because most people don't, right? It's just not by intention, right? Yeah. It just catches up with you, right? And especially as people are getting married later and later, right? They're bringing more and more, right, financial commitments to the table, right or wrong, right? Whether it's student loans, whether it's children they've already had, whether you name it, and it just becomes more. Now, if you're a young person, right? So your ways, exactly. If you're a young person, relatively young, and you're kind of bucking the trend and getting married relatively early, I would say start doing things now while you don't have a lot of commitments on your money. Start tithing, start saving up for a house, start saving up for your retirement before you start trying to keep up with the Joneses and you can't keep setting money aside, right? So if you're younger, you're in a good position because every person who's ahead of you by about 10 years, to the point you said, Aaliyah, will tell you, save your money. That's one thing Aaliyah's dad always told me, hold on to your money now, save your money. So that would be what I would say, Magna, as far as, kind of getting on that foundation. It's a business.
Okay. Now, going further, right? It was you guys for, I don't know how many years, 5, 6 years before you had kids. What were the things that you would say you need to do before you have kids? And then what is that transition like in the things that you've learned after having kids that you would talk about in your marriage?
I would say, well, I think we were intentional in waiting. I know for me, I wanted to be married, for a while before introducing kids into the equation, because we had that as a luxury. Now, certainly the pressure from, some of our family and stuff like that was, could be really intense. I felt like my parents were super supportive. They were like, do your thing, whatever, but similarly, there's an age difference between us. And so, that does come into play as well. So I know people were like, I mean, are you gonna have children soon? But I thought that, at least by doing that, we would have the space to figure out what we like, what we don't like, who we are, because, the children are in your life for a period. And for us, like, we're in the thick of that right now. But once the children are gone, you still want to be married,
Right.
So,
Right.
you want to be like, okay, then.
Right. Right.
We done. No, that's you still want to have a relationship.
I think that's the key is we decided not to have children for a while, but then when we decided we wanted to have children, we had to try for a while, right? And then when we finally, let go and stop trying to, then we conceived. And at that point, I remember, babe, that you called me out of a meeting. I was in DC, and you said finally that you're expecting. And I think we talked for like 5.5 hours or something like that. I took for just to plant the picture. I was in DC at the Washington Hilton, and the entire time we talked, I walked around the entire Washington Mall twice.
Oh wow!
Yes, it was. That's how long we were on the phone, right? Because you're like, even if you had kids, you're like, oh my gosh, your life is like going to totally change, and then no matter how confident you think you are and how much you've planned and talked about it, when you realize, oh man, now we have kids coming, you wonder if you've done all the things you need to do to plan and whatever. So I think that the moment you find out was just amazing. And yes, it was great to finally tell people to stop bugging me about when I was going to have kids that we were expecting.
Right.
Of course, our daughter was born at 8:20, and at about 9:20 that morning, people were asking me when we were going to have number 2. But that's exactly how it works. They just keep asking. But I think that's what I would say is that, like Aaliyah said, you got to be intentional up front. Then you got to really start thinking about, okay, your life is going to revolve around your kids, but at some point they're going to be gone, right? You're training them and raising them to be gone as close to 21 as possible. That's a whole nother hour.
Right? That is helpful. But I mean, right. that is something that we're hoping will happen, and certainly we're speaking that for our children. But now I feel like more often than that, reality isn't necessarily that they can go out on their own and just like be ready, because financially it's a lot, these days. You got to make a lot of coins to be able to support yourself and to do those things without your parents.
I know we keep coming back to the financial piece, and I think it's important only because it is what it is. The foundation of everything is your economic security. That's what gives you the physical, mental, and emotional space to be able to love, plan, fellowship, everything. We all know what it's like to be under financial pressure. And when you're under financial pressure, you just don't have room for anything else. Right. And so that's why it's the most important thing you can do from a practical standpoint, to lay a foundation so that the things we did find that we liked about each other and loved about each other and want to do and everything. And when you identify a dream, you can actually afford to fund it. Right. That's where all that stuff comes into play. So I know I keep coming back to that. People think, dude, it's not actually a business, it's a marriage. Yes, I know that. But it's just so critical, right? If we're talking about, advice we'd give to younger couples who are getting started, this would be pretty much top 2 or 3 on the list, is to get this part right up front.
So I think it's women, and I'm just going to speak for me and Victoria. Aaliyah might have thought this way, but she was on that, like, look, I need to build my empire. And so, in there, and I've been on a lot of places, a lot of different planes. But one thing that I think a lot of women think about is, at least now, we're like, well, we can build together. Me and my partner together. And I feel like men always think, no, I need to build. I need to have stuff. I need to have something that I can then bring this woman into. And so men need to be on a much more stable foundation. However, what I think I am learning in this 36th year of life is that I'm starting to understand why men, and I think it goes back to your point, Larry, of why men cannot be in a relationship and build. And I'm not saying build upon what they've already built. I'm saying like starting together and building from scratch, is because they really don't have the capacity to what you just said. You can't do all of these things if your economic standing isn't right. I don't have any room or capacity for anything else. And I'm really starting to see that now, because I didn't see that at 25, at 30. I'm like, whatever, we can build this together. Let's work it out. Yeah. But I get it, and I'm seeing it in such a different perspective the older I get, and why.
Right or wrong, fair or not, our society does what it does as far as shaping expectations and perceptions. That's right. And dudes, we got to have stuff to impress. That's almost like, it's almost like a foundation. It's like before you go out there and try to find someone like an Aaliyah or someone like a Magdalene or Victoria, before you can even have a chance to with one of, you got to bring a lot to the table. Right. And we're laughing, but there really is a lot. I can tell you, for me, at least, there's a lot of truth to that, that part of what you bring to the table to be attractive, to be that person, is things, and not because you're materialistic, but because that means you have what it takes to get them. Right. And so there is a lot of self-image involved in that. Right. And so to your point, Magdalene, when I know that when we first got started, we could talk about when we went to that wedding in Jamaica. Right. I went all out trying to impress her. Right. And we were already in a long-term relationship at that point. I still was trying to be like, no, just so you know, I'm going to charter this plane. Right.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
I mean, there's a little Cessna. Don't get jets in your mind. Right. It was, but I mean, still, it was like, you just, that's what we do. Right. So.
Let me just think. No, go. You go.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I think it's still fair to say those are the things that make it easier. Can it happen without those things in place? Absolutely. But it takes a lot of maturity. And I'm not going to say that we're immature, but I think that means that in your mind, you already have to deal with the stuff. So that means when you roll up, at a place and that you can't afford X, Y, or Z, you have to be comfortable in that space. And that may not be super easy, at all of the time. And so there's a lot of dealing with yourself that you have to do, and then come together and still be okay. And so I think so often that's the part, because now I'm thinking about other relationships where it's like, oh my God, I love you so much. Then we fall out of love, but 10 years later we get back together. And why did that work? Well, that was 10 years later, we were able to kind of mature a little bit, understand what we really want, and be a little more, intentional and directed in that.
Good stuff. Do you guys, let me just ask you this. What do you think, from both of you guys' perspectives, is the toughest thing, because people always say married is hard work. Married is so hard. People say it all the time. I mean, now they're saying it way more often than anything. Like, oh, it's hard, it's hard. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I get some of it, like somebody's in your space all the time. Okay. But what do you guys think is probably the hardest thing to transition into being married or in marriage life? But of course it could be rewarding, but one of the hardest things that you guys have experienced.
I would say the humility component, because especially the older that you get, you're set in your ways, you appreciate the things that you appreciate, and it isn't, you want to walk arm in arm, and we want to always be on the same footing, but you have to be willing to duck down or to stand up or to bend over, and sometimes that's not comfortable. And that can create a lot of the friction, or at least kind of create ultimately, things that are not good in the relationship that you didn't even know were there.
Yeah.
I really not much else I can say to that, right? I mean, really, no, seriously. Aaliyah's laughing because normally I do have something to say, but she's absolutely right. I mean, it's really, you're no longer on your own. I would only add that, a very crude analogy, if there's a disagreement and you want to storm off, you have to come back at some point, right? You can't just be done. You can't just turn your back. You got to work it through, right? And once you realize after the first couple of times like that, then at least one of my feeling was always, how many swords are there really worth falling on? Right? They're, for me, they're very few, because in the end, you're gonna make up, you're gonna get on the same page, and there's no point doing anything too hurtful or anything to win the moment, right? Because long term, it's going to bite you, right? So I think, to me, that's probably in addition to what she said, the biggest learning when you're just getting started. And again, I know that you can probably divide this up from married couples who lived together before they got married and didn't, and therefore may have worked through some of these things first before they said I do. Just for the record, Leah and I did not.
Okay.
Right. Literally, as many other things are old fashioned. Our first night living together was the day we got off the airplane from our honeymoon. Right. And so the next morning, when I didn't like where the toothpaste tube was, it started. Right. I'm exaggerating. That didn't happen, but you get my point. It's like we started learning all that little stuff then. Right. So.
Great. Maggie,
can I ask you, do you have any perspective on, and you can tell me you do not want to answer. Do you have any perspective on living together versus not living together?
Right.
In 15 years after you've been married, any perspective on, any different perspective on that?
I think it worked for us. I don't know if as a 40-year-old plus woman, that works wonderfully well. I don't know. I mean, I think there are some factors that come into play, but it worked for us, and I'm glad that we did it, because I think it was a way to just jump in. It's like not just dipping your toe in the water to see what it's like, and then you're gonna go, okay, that's it. It's kind of like, I'm here, I'm gonna be here, and we're gonna have to work through this, because I think long term, that's what you have to be willing to give to stay married.
I would agree. I think, not having ever done it, I know the decision to live together before you get married is almost as much a financial one as it is a decision to just try it out. Right. And so with that being said, you can't judge people's situation if they're going to do it that way. That being said, you still are in that position to leave, to be out. So all those conversations that you have to have and be on the same page before you get married, you can still kind of hold some things back a little bit because you're not fully, and so I have always, and again, if it worked for you, and I think Lee is absolutely right, then I'm not speaking to you. Me personally, logically, it's almost like there's really no alternative to just going in there, right, and being in a situation where you know, the fact that you don't like the laundry being a certain way is what drives you apart. If that's what makes you not be able to stay together, right? That's something you should be able just to work through after you've already tied the knot. So
nice. Now, Maggie, ask them the question we always ask for the conclusion.
oh boy.
Yes. So this is all wonderful.
Yes,
This has been great. Lots of nuggets that you've dropped.
Yes.
What are some last words of wisdom, encouragement, anything maybe you think you left off that you maybe wanted to share with the audience that you would leave us with before you leave?
Mm-hmm. Single or married, whoever you want to speak to.
All right. Go ahead, babe.
Okay. Oh, all right. Well, I was gonna say the biggest thing that I think made me feel like, okay, I think this is gonna work. It was important for us, or at least for me, we approached our relationship as two completes. So, that famous line in Jerry Maguire when it's like, you complete me.
Right.
I appreciate that. And I think that, yes, there are ways that we are a package and a really strong package together. But I think it was critical that we were intentional in working on ourselves, because if you're seeking someone as you're seeking yourself, it's hard to do that. It really is. Whether you're married or you're single, you have to have an idea of who you are in order to be able to give to a relationship a whole person.
Good.
Okay.
I would echo that, and I would also say listen to your gut, especially traditionally. I gotta be careful here because times have changed, but traditionally, ladies, trust your gut. Y'all know exactly what I'm talking about, right? We aren't a project to work on, right? Trust your gut. Because again, we don't want to be worked on, right? You don't want to spend time working on it. And then if your gut is telling you that this is the one, then go for it. Don't overthink it. There's a lot of thinking to be done, but don't overthink that one. Just commit and keep whatever you do, keep moving forward.
Good
word.
You understand? Because
I have a project that don't like to be worked on. Thank you, Larry.
Right. I'm about to say, because that's what they want to say to us, but you said it in such a classy way. So we'll receive it. Okay. So I don't know. I always get so, in the words of Pastor Barbara, I'm grateful. I'm just so grateful. Pastor Barbara. I'm just so grateful because I'm just like, wow, God brought these people to us tonight to give us these different dynamics of a practical relationship and a well thought out and loving, and you have kids and it's amazing, and everybody's story is amazing. You guys are amazing. I really thank you guys so much for coming on. I thank you for bringing the business into, like, this is not Love and Hip Hop. It's not TV. This is real. This is real life. So I really appreciate you doing that for us. We're, like I said, I'll never stop saying it. I'm grateful that you guys are here. So this is our end of our show. We want to say this before we leave. Maggie is the last of our group who's going to be transitioning past. Wait, how old you going to be, Maggie?
I will be 37 years old.
Good child. All right. 37, girl, we old. Okay. In a few more years, we're going to be full. Oh, Lord. Anyway. So so Maggie, put your Cash App in the chat. I
don't have Cash App, but I'll put my Venmo.
Oh, put your Zelle. Okay. Venmo. Yeah, because Cash App be tripping sometimes. It's not trustworthy. Yes. So thank you guys so much for watching us today. Thank you for. Well, first of all, we just thank you for being here in general. Those who tune in every time, we can't see who's tuning in, but we know you're there. So we thank you for that. Please don't forget to like our page. It's The Waiting Game Chapter 35. Like us on YouTube, like us on Instagram, like us all over. Look at the video, share, comment. If you ever want to come on the show, please let us know, because it's going to be a while, because now we're going into Christmas season. So we're going to have a little hiatus. But unless God speaks and says, get on, then we'll get on. But if not, then we'll see you in 2022. Oh my goodness. Because that's only a few weeks away. So we love you guys and we thank you so much. We bless you guys, the Rileys. We bless you. Because we've been trying to get y'all on, just so you know, we've been trying to get y'all on for the longest. I said, Maggie, are they coming? Are they coming? Are they gonna come? So I'm glad we waited. It was worth the wait.
Yes.
So we love you guys.
Thank you
so much. And you guys who are out there, be safe. Be safe out here. COVID is still here. Okay, guys, just remember that. But still live your life, but live it healthy, safe. Be safe. All right. We love you guys. Happy holidays, and we will talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.